Charting Toward Intimacy covers mature topics. Listener discretion is advised. Charting Toward Intimacy covers mature topics. Listener discretion is advised.
We are constantly discerning God's will in our life and recognizing that we may not be the best parents that we could be right now, and we have the option or the ability to discern where God is calling us, and we can do that through NFP.
Hey there, welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy, where we're expanding the natural family planning conversation. I'm your host, Ellen Holloway. All right, we are here with Maya and Joe, and this is part of our seasons of natural family planning use episodes. This season, we're going to be talking about when you're newly married and just kind of the special intricacies of that season, especially when you're trying to avoid. And Maya and Joe have a fantastic story to share. So Maya and Joe, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Ellen. Thanks for having us on today.
Yeah, thanks, Ellen.
Yeah. So could you guys start by just telling us a little bit about yourselves?
Yeah. So my name is Maya Wells Hermerding. I am a first-year law student at the University of Minnesota Law School. Joseph, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah. Obviously, I'm Joe. I am a pre-med student in my first semester of studies there. I guess as a couple, we were married just over 6 months ago and currently living in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Mm-hmm. And then we thought we would just give you a quick background about us. We're from the same hometown in Minnesota, little ways up north. We started dating in high school, and we have about, so I guess it's been, 7-ish years that we've been together, and
7 or 8 years. Yeah.
7 or 8 years, and about 5 of those were spent in a long distance relationship.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I just want to pause for a quick second because your story is extremely similar to my husband and I.
Really?
We met in high school. We dated for about 7 to 8 years before we got married. It was like 7.5. 5 of those years were long distance. Like, this is just weird.
This is wild.
Yeah. Isn't long distance super fun too?
Oh man, it's the best, isn't it? It just makes your heart grow fonder.
Yeah.
We kept telling ourselves, absence makes the heart grow fonder.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's awesome. So this episode, this season that we're talking about is when you're newly married, and it's going to be similar to the other trying to avoid episodes that we're doing, but I wanted to put a particular focus on when you're newly married because I think there is a different mindset that you have. Like suddenly you're newly married, suddenly like intercourse has been off the table. Now it's on, but you're like actively trying to avoid. And there's just a whole nother like thought process to have there. And so that's why we're having this particular episode of kind of newly married and trying to avoid. All right. So Maya and Joe, tell me about your experience just charting during this season.
Yeah. So the way that we talked about this question between ourselves, we kind of started with how long I had been charting before we got married. And as an avid listener of your podcast, I remember listening to people saying, I started charting. I mean, there are women who chart for years before they get married. And then there are women who learn it months before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I fell into the latter category because I did not grow up Catholic. I'm a Catholic convert. And so NFP was never introduced to me. Definitely not as a moral obligation and not really even as an option.
Mm-hmm.
So it was something that we started talking about in college as I took a class called Family, Church, and Society. And we talked about the moral implications of using contraceptives. And so we finally came to the decision between ourselves that we were going to commit to NFP, but it wasn't something that we learned until, I don't know, maybe 5 months before we got married. And I really didn't start charting until about 3 months before our wedding. So I guess from that experience, I wish that I had learned it a little bit earlier because it's taught me, I wish I had learned it earlier in like a health education class or a young women's parish group like, I know FEM has a great young women's program.
Right. Teen Femme is fabulous.
Yeah. And they teach women how to chart their cycle just for better understanding of their own body. Because yes, charting has taught me so much about my own health, my reproductive system, and honestly, a lot about my menstrual system, or my menstrual cycle.
Yeah.
That I was completely unknown, and I was experiencing a lot of pain that I could have understood if I had gone through this process earlier.
Yeah.
Yes. But then to speak about charting as newlyweds and kind of our experience together, do you want to talk about this?
Sure. I guess I can talk about it. I'm lost in our notes document now. You're going to have to cut this part out.
That's okay.
Well, I guess first, I think it would be helpful maybe just to speak to my side of learning NFP, especially as the husband or the male in the relationship, because I grew up Catholic. I'm a cradle Catholic, so went to church every Sunday, and have always just assumed NFP was going to be our method of avoiding pregnancy initially. And then
can I interrupt really fast? Was NFP something you kind of always knew about growing up, or like what was your introduction to NFP, out of curiosity?
Yeah, no, good question. So my parents practiced NFP, and it's no criticism of them, but I have 6 siblings, 7 kids in my family. I think my mom had her first kid when she was 23.
And then they just kind of had kids once they entered that season.
Just because they felt called to do. But I always knew about NFP, but I don't think I understood NFP as something that can be utilized quite as dynamically as we're able to utilize it. I always saw NFP just as
not using contraceptives.
Yeah.
It just means have as many babies as God gives you, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. Just like cross your fingers and see what happens.
Luckily, we now know it is not that.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so as we approached marriage, it was really interesting on my side of things. First off, to have conversations with Maya where she presented some doubts or some concerns or some questions about how is this going to work? Is this going to be effective? Especially she's in law school. I'm a pre-med student. Being able to approach our life with confidence that we can avoid pregnancy if we want to, and then eventually we can flip to the other side of things and hopefully conceive a child. But
and even to add a religious element, like to take it out of what we want, we don't feel called to be parents right now. Eventually, we have a great desire. And so, yeah, it's just nice knowing that, like, we are constantly discerning God's will in our life and recognizing that we may not be the best parents that we could be right now. And we have the option or the ability to discern where God is calling us. And we can do that through NFP.
Yeah, that's fabulous. Thank you for saying that.
So I guess to the mechanics of starting as newlyweds. So we use the couple-to-couple symptothermal method. We've had great success with it so far. And it's also nice being a young couple. I don't think that this is necessarily true with older couples that we've encountered. We're able to use an app. There's an app for that.
Right.
And so we use, the couple-to-couple league cycle ProGo. And it's incredibly handy because I have it on my phone and Joseph has it on his phone. So we've divided the charting responsibilities between us. I typically enter the mucus signs and sensations, and then Joseph will enter temperatures because we use this great little device called a temp drop.
I love a temp drop. I have one too.
It's so nice because when we started charting, I was waking up at 5 or 6 every morning, taking my temperature, which I don't have to do. And it saves precious sleeping hours on the weekend.
Right.
Yes, as a student. And so it's also nice because it does help us divide responsibility between the two of us, because I sync the temp drop to my phone, but then Joseph takes my phone and will enter in temperatures to the Cycle ProGo. Yes.
Nice. I love that.
I would say something to go off of that is that I've found, and maybe we will speak to this a little bit later, but because of all the technological options that we have, an app, temp drop, I mean, just honestly, just both those things makes charting far easier than I think we expected. And not that it wasn't a struggle to learn, because it definitely was. We took classes and we did everything by hand. And so even with the app or with the temp drop, we still double check everything. Like, mm-hmm. So when we're going through the various phases, it's not like we're going to be like, oh, the app says it, so we're good. We kind of double check everything. Mm-hmm. But having the background that we have, having gotten educated through classes and through our own research, it is nice at this point just being able to have a little bit less responsibility and pressure to be precise by hand with everything. Mm-hmm. So I would say that the various technological elements make it a little bit more manageable than I had initially expected. I was worried we were going to be getting up at 5 a.m. every morning with Maya, taking temperatures and then plotting by hand. And it's not quite that intense.
Yeah, that temp drop is a game changer. And like from my season of life right now, which is with a 4-month-old, like I'm up a couple of times at night, and like otherwise my temperatures would be everywhere. Like I would not be able to get a good temp reading. And like I do have good temp readings because anyway, I'm sorry. This is not an ad for temp drop.
I know we were taking notes on all the resources and technology that we use, and we're like, oh gosh, we sound like we're sponsored or something.
It's like an infomercial.
I should reach out to Temp Drop and have them sponsor this episode.
But honestly, it is good too, because as we started our venture into NFP, I spent hours researching various resources. I found your podcast, and I know that I sang your praises earlier, but truly, like, these are the things that we wanted to share these resources so that other people can find them more easily, and they don't have to spend those hours that might deter them from using NFP or even exploring it as a realistic option.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, I so appreciate that. All right. Do you have more experience of this season?
I think anything else that we'll say probably will come up later on in the conversation.
Perfect. All right. So, all right. Now we get to some of the nitty gritty. What are the most difficult aspects of charting during this season and using NFP?
Yeah, that's I can start because I think a good anecdote for some of the difficulties, especially as newlyweds trying to avoid. We initially were very conservative with everything and because we were very concerned about, man, what if we're going to be that case where we follow all the rules, track everything perfectly, and then we're going to have sex and conceive a child and we're going to be parents 2 weeks into our marriage.
Or I will be a first-year law student walking around the law school pregnant.
Yeah.
Which would not be the end of the world, but it was a scary thought.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So going into our marriage, we obviously learned a lot about NFP. We're trying really hard to track diligently, but still we're, again, very nervous about it. Nervous about, I think, trusting the process, having faith in the process, having faith in what the signs and the science told us. And so, yeah, I think just to start out our marriage, I know we were like very careful with everything. And I think because of that, there maybe was some, I don't know, I think there were difficulties, or there was like, we weren't able to as fully enjoy our marriage as we probably could have, or maybe even should have in a certain sense, because we were so cautious.
Sure.
But that's not to say that there was fault in that, because it's just, I think, a natural thing to be like, it's obviously getting married and being able to enjoy the fruits of marriage. It's a big step. It's a big change from before you're married to after you're married.
Right. There's a big switch that gets flipped, and it's like, whoa, okay.
Yeah. There's a pretty big switch that flips. And so going about it cautiously, I think, is fair. But I would say it's good to be able to trust NFP. And it just took us a while to get to that point.
To that end, I think one thing that we struggled with, and it will come up in our advice later, we didn't have young friends practicing NFP. The people that we knew that practiced NFP were typically older couples. honestly probably in the menopause phase where they weren't even actively using NFP at the time. They had just experienced it. And almost every single one of them confided in us that they didn't start using NFP. At one point in their marriage, they had used contraceptives, realized that they realized the moral complications with using contraceptives, and transitioned to NFP. So we really didn't have secondhand experience or good friends who could share their experience starting marriage using NFP. And so I think that would have been something that had changed our confidence in it too.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, definitely.
Not being able to confide in other people or hear stories of young couples who have practiced NFP for a long time and successfully avoided pregnancy was really tough. Because like Maya said, we had some couples where they were like, yeah, we switched to NFP and it was great, but we did end up conceiving right away, even when we were trying to avoid. And we were like, oh, cool.
That's like the worst advertisement for NFP because it like doesn't explain the intricacies at all. And it just makes it seem like fertility awareness science is wrong or something. Like,
yeah, well, and it makes it seem like it was effective when you were using contraception and then NFP was not effective. And
right.
That's not the message you want.
So not true. But, unfortunately, just I feel like when that happens, when a couple switches from contraception to NFP and conceives right away, there's both a switch to a method of family planning, but there's also like a switch in mindset of like openness to life and like possibly a switch in family planning intention, like at the same time. And so it doesn't add up because you're like, wait, NFP must not work.
Yeah. It's not a true reflection on NFP. It's a reflection on a wide array of variables.
Yes,
exactly. Oh my gosh.
Then switching to the more technical side with difficulties of charting, I think, especially since we're in such a busy part of our lives, I'm running to class, he's running to class, we're trying to make sure that we have enough food in our refrigerator. I think consistency can sometimes be more difficult. It's definitely gotten easier the farther we get into our marriage, but not missing days, especially in those very important days leading up to phase 3. Mm-hmm. But again, the things that we've talked about, the applications, dividing responsibility, having the temp drop, those have all really helped us be more consistent and make sure that we're charting regularly. But at the beginning, because it was such a learning process, and maybe this goes back to what I was saying about learning it younger and independently for my own sake, it might have been a little bit easier to have that learning process and the ability to miss days earlier on.
Right. Well, and I get that with clients a lot when I first teach NFP to them. It's like just the process of making that a daily part of your routine that's honestly probably harder than learning the rules themselves. It's like, oh, I have to like check my tissue every time I go to the bathroom. Like that's a totally new concept. But yeah, like to your point, if we could encourage young women to start doing that when it isn't as big of a deal and they can miss a day here and there. And as they get more and more comfortable and it becomes more and more routine, and then they get married and it's like, oh, this is already second nature. Like it's not a big deal to add this.
Mm-hmm. And you can feel confident about where you are too, because again, the confidence element was difficult for us.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah. And I think I hear that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So what kind of tips or suggestions do you have for couples in the same season who are navigating this season or who are looking toward navigating this season soon?
Mm-hmm. I think the first point we would make is communication is key.
Yes.
As it is so many parts of our lives. But I think that dividing responsibility between Joseph and myself, we've made it clear that we try to make it as equal as possible, just because it was really important to me that we not treat NFP like a Catholic contraceptive. but it really be a discerning process for the two of us. And I never wanted to use the gatekeeper mentality.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Well, especially because we had actually been, some of the places we had learned NFP had used that mentality. Kind of jokingly, they were like, haha, I would follow the rules and then just tell them when we were ready. And it was, to each their own. But I think to build on Maya's point of communication, it's especially good early on to just set up who's going to be responsible for what, but then also adapt as you go. Because I think initially we had expectations and we had to change just based on what was realistic as far as what my responsibilities should be or could be, and what Maya was going to be responsible for keeping track of. And it's not like it's a hard and fast, you take care of this, you take care of this. It's obviously very dynamic. But I think just communication, keeping things open, being flexible, and trying to figure out the best way for both sides of the relationship to be involved in the most fruitful way is really important.
And then another element of communication, obviously there are periods of time where you can't be sexually romantic with NFP. And so keeping the lines of communication open about non-sexual ways to be romantic. We've had to touch base a couple times already in our marriage, just saying, hey, I know we're in phase 2 and I know we can't have sex, but I may not be feeling love the way that I feel love, or I receive love in at this point or in this phase, and just talking through what that means for both of us and how we can change our behavior or maybe evolve our behavior in the cycles going forward.
Yeah, well, and I think that kind of communication, which really stems. I feel like you're kind of talking about love languages specifically, that can really help you mature your relationship as husband and wife, to have those deeper conversations about, what are the ways that I truly feel love? Because sometimes it's physical touch and that physical intimacy, but other times there are completely separate ways that one or both spouses will feel at or receive love that don't have anything to do with sex. And that then just makes sex better when both sides, both spouses have really felt like they've received love to their specific love language. And then it just culminates in a better marital intimacy down the line.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. And I think another thing that can be really helpful, it has been very helpful for us along those same lines, is being willing to be open about practicing NFP, because as we found, it's really hard to find young couples who practice NFP and are willing to talk about it. But I think part of the issue might also be, it's not necessarily, we kind of have a saying between ourselves, make NFP cool again. It's not necessarily cool to practice NFP, but yet we have, when we have been more open about it, we have made some new friends recently who also practice NFP. And it was one of those things where we kind of had to feel it out, maybe bring it up subtly in conversation, see if they pick up on it. And then they do, and you're like, oh, this is great. We have people we can confide in. We have husbands and wives we can talk to, and we can feel supported in those relationships. And so it can be a little intimidating to be willing to be open to telling people you practice NFP or somehow bring that up in conversation. We found it incredibly fruitful when you do take that leap of faith and make it known to others, especially if they reciprocate, because I think they're probably in the same boat where they say, we don't want people to know because it's not cool. It's not the norm to practice NFP. And so I think if everyone were able to just be a little bit more open, you'll find those relationships and you'll find more people maybe practice than you expected.
Yes. I want a shirt that says make NFP cool again.
Do it. You should make those and I would buy one.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I think I might look into this.
And then I guess 2 points that I would add to what Joseph said is, yes, be open about it, because it can help you find mentor couples or NFP colleagues, if you will.
I love that.
But honestly, some of the people that I found express the most interest in our NFP journey are actually my non-religious friends. which surprised me when I started talking to them and explaining to them that we're not using contraceptives. And it's particularly my non-religious friends who, I don't know how to explain it, but they want to, they obviously, they want to stop using contraceptives, and kind of lean into more holistic, maybe healthcare.
Yeah.
And so they realize that there's this method out there, either NFP or FABMs. And so they've never heard about it in the way that I hadn't really heard about it growing up. And so they have all sorts of questions for me. Well, how did you learn about this? What resources did you use? Who else does this? What
is this?
What is this?
What is this magic?
Yeah. And it truly blows their mind that they don't have to take oral contraceptives every day in order to avoid a pregnancy. And also the burden isn't on the female to control her menstrual cycle or her reproductive system. It can be a
more even split.
Right. A partnership.
Yeah.
As it should be.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. You guys have just hit home runs with some of the things that you're saying. I'm just sitting there like, oh yes, say this again. This is fabulous. Thank you guys so much. Was there anything else you guys wanted to share? Any other tips or suggestions?
There was one last thing I was going to add to the community, or to the sharing your experience element.
Yeah.
Advice as newlyweds, and we toe the line between millennial and Gen Z. So we thought we would just add this in. If you can't find a physically present community or mentors, don't be afraid to look online. Again, I said we did a lot of researching online. And so we found online communities through Cycle Pro Go. You can post questions and you'll actually get responses from trained NFP instructors. We watched a lot of YouTube videos. We read Reddit threads.
Yeah.
I have not explored
and
the NFP world of Reddit.
I know.
I think I need to start looking into that.
Yeah. And obviously you don't want to treat them as authority. They can't replace formal instruction. But if you just kind of feel like you need to be heard and seen, there's some really good online communities out there.
Yeah. I think you find a lot of people who are similar to what we said earlier. Maybe in person, they don't want to be as much of an advocate for NFP, but online, they can be a very strong advocate. And I know we've had questions before where we'll post it as we're going to bed on some forum or some website. And the next day we'll wake up and there'll be 5 responses already. So people are very excited to support one another and provide information when they can.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, such a good point. Oh my gosh, you guys, thank you so much for coming on, for sharing your story, for just some really great advice that you guys had. This was fabulous. Thank you guys so much.
No problem.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Ellen.
Ellen.
Thanks so much for listening. If you are not already following us on Instagram, be sure to check us out at Charting Toward Intimacy. And again, this is a part of our 9-part series on NFP use throughout the different seasons of life. This is episode 3 of 9. So be sure to check out the episodes before and after this to get the entire series. If you have questions, comments, or episode topic ideas, I love hearing from you guys. My email or Instagram links are in the show notes. So definitely reach out to me. Until next time.